Of all the places I thought I'd be at 68 years old, a third-floor room in the Golden Twilight Assisted Living Center, staring out a window that only opens 4 inches, was not one of them. Not when my name is Eleanor Vance and I have a brokerage account with a balance of $5,274,000. That's not a boast, it's a fact. A fact that was stolen from me, along with my home, my freedom, and my dignity, by the one person I thought I could trust after my son was gone. My daughter-in-law, a smiling diaper named Tiffany. They said I had dementia. They said I was a danger to myself. What they didn't say was that I was in their way and that they had underestimated the woman who built a life from scratch right alongside her husband. If you're ready for this journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this a like so you don't miss the updates. And let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. It's always lovely to see where everyone is. Now, let's start at the beginning. It's the only way you'll believe me. It all started the day my world fell apart for the second time. The first time was when I lost my husband, George, to a heart attack that came out of nowhere. We'd been married for 45 years. He was the kind of man who'd get up early to warm up my car in the winter, the kind of man who held my hand during every single doctor's appointment. We'd built a successful little chain of hardware stores together, starting with one dusty shop and a lot of hope. He handled the tools and the contractors. I handled the books and the people. We were a team. When he died, half of me went with him. The second time my world ended was a year later, when my son, Michael, died in a car accident. My Michael, my only child. That was a blow I didn't think I could survive. He was a good boy, a good man. He left behind his wife, Tiffany, and a grief so profound it felt like a physical weight on my chest. For weeks, I barely moved from the old floral armchair in my living room, the one that looked out over the garden George had so carefully tended. Tiffany was there, of course. She'd bring me tea I wouldn't drink and soup I wouldn't eat. She was the perfect picture of a grieving daughter-in-law, always there with a comforting hand on my shoulder, a tissue at the ready. "Oh, Eleanor," she'd coo, her voice dripping with sympathy. "We only have each other now. We have to take care of each other." That's when she started. Looking back, the signs were all there, bright as neon, but my grief was a fog I couldn't see through. She'd help with the mail, sorting it into piles. She'd offer to pay my bills for me just to take the load off. "You have enough to worry about," she'd say. I let her. I was so broken, so tired of fighting the current of my own sorrow that I just let her. Michael had adored her, and I loved my son. I trusted his judgment. That was my first mistake. The big one came about 2 months after Michael's funeral. Tiffany sat me down on my own kitchen table, a stack of papers in her hand, and a practiced, serious look on her face. "Eleanor," she began, "I was talking with our financial advisor, and with Michael gone, well, we need to make sure you're protected. All of this business with the estate and the investments, it can be so overwhelming." She slid a document across the table. It was thick, full of words that swam before my eyes. "It's just a power of attorney," she said, her voice a gentle murmur. "It doesn't change anything about who owns what. It just lets me handle the complicated phone calls and sign things on your behalf if you're not feeling up to it. It's what Michael would have wanted. He always told me to take care of Mom." She said the magic words. "It's what Michael would have wanted." I would have signed anything if I thought it was what my son wanted. I remember my hand trembling as I picked up the pen. I didn't read it, not a single word. I just saw the empty space where my son should have been, and I signed my life away. Things changed slowly at first. A few pieces of my good jewelry went missing. "You must have misplaced it, Eleanor," Tiffany would say with a little laugh. "Your memory is getting a little foggy, you know?" Then she started bringing men over. Business associates, she'd call them. They'd walk through my house, my home of 40 years, tapping on walls and measuring rooms. When I asked her what was going on, she'd pat my hand and say, "Just getting some appraisals done for insurance purposes, sweetie. Don't you worry your pretty little head about it." It was the way she said it, like I was a child, a dotty old woman who couldn't possibly understand the world of adults. The final act happened on a Tuesday. I woke up to find Tiffany and 2 strangers standing in my bedroom. One was a man in a cheap suit with a clipboard, and the other was a woman who looked like she'd sucked on a lemon her whole life. "Eleanor, honey, this is Dr. Finch. He's just here to ask you a few questions." The questions were a joke. Who is the president? What year is it? Can you count backwards from 100 by sevens? I answered them all, annoyed but not truly afraid. Then he asked, "Do you sometimes forget where you've put things?" "Well, yes," I said. "Doesn't everyone?" He scribbled on his clipboard. "And do you find yourself feeling sad or confused since your son's passing?" "My son is dead. Of course I'm sad." The words came out sharper than I intended. He and Tiffany exchanged a look, a knowing, conspiratorial look that sent a chill down my spine. An hour later, they told me it was all arranged. I was being moved to a place where I could be monitored for my own safety. They said I'd been forgetting to take my medication, a lie. They said I'd wandered out of the house at night, another lie. Tiffany had been building a case against me for months, twisting my grief into a diagnosis of dementia. She had the paperwork, she had the doctor, and she had my signature on that damned power of attorney. I remember screaming, I remember trying to fight them as they packed a small bag for me, but I was a 68-year-old woman, and they were strong. They walked me out of my own front door, the one George and I had painted robin's egg blue just a few years before. As they put me in the car, I saw a for sale sign being hammered into my front lawn. My garden, my roses, my home. It was all gone. Tiffany leaned in before she closed the door, her face close to mine. Her voice was no longer sweet. It was cold, hard steel. "This is for the best, Eleanor. You'll be comfortable. Don't make a fuss." And just when he thought he had me backed into a corner, he forgot who he was dealing with. Stick with me, because you'll want to see how this plays out. Golden twilight was as dreary as it sounds. The hall smelled of anesthetic and despair. My room was tiny, the color of weak tea, with a bed that was too hard and a roommate, Doris, who just stared at the wall all day. I wasn't Eleanor Vance anymore. I was Unit 3B. They took my purse, my phone, my wedding ring for safekeeping, they said. I was a prisoner. I tried to tell the nurses, the director, anyone who would listen. There's been a mistake. My daughter-in-law is stealing from me. I have millions of dollars. They would just nod and smile, that same condescending smile Tiffany had perfected. "Of course, dear. Now let's take our pills." They'd mark it in my chart. "Patient is delusional, suffers from paranoid fantasies about wealth." Tiffany had done her job well. She had erased me. For the first few weeks, I cried. I lay in that stiff bed and sobbed for George, for Michael, for the life that had been ripped away from me. Then, one night, the grief started to curdle. It turned into something else, something hard and sharp. It turned into rage. I realized that crying wasn't going to get me out of here. Pleading wasn't going to work. The only person who could save Eleanor Vance was Eleanor Vance. I started observing. That's what I did for our business. I watched people. I learned their habits. I saw how the night staff was lazy. The security guard, a young kid named Kevin, spent most of his shift from 2 to 4 a.m. watching movies on his phone in the front lobby. The alarm on the side door in the West Wing was faulty. It would beep sometimes, but it never actually sent a signal to the main desk. I learned that deliveries came at 5 a.m. Linens, food. The back gate would be unlocked for about 15 minutes. I started pretending to be the model patient. I took the sugar pills they gave me without argument. I smiled my vacant, demented smile. I went to the pathetic craft sessions and made a lopsided bot holder. I became invisible. And all the while, I was planning. I traded my dessert, a stale cookie, for another resident's extra sweater. I saved the rubber-soled slippers they gave me, knowing they'd be quiet. I hoarded saltine crackers and a small water bottle from my meal trays, hiding them under the loose floor tile beneath my bed. I knew I couldn't access my money, not from in here. Tiffany had locked it down tight. If I escaped, I'd be just another old woman on the street. The thought was terrifying, but it was better than being a ghost in this beige prison. The rage in my heart was a fire now, and it burned away the fear.
Tiffany thought she had buried me. She thought I was a doddering old fool she could just write off. But she forgot where I came from. She forgot I was the one who had balanced the books for a multi-million-dollar company on my kitchen table. She forgot I was the one who could spot a phony invoice from 50 feet away. She put me in a box, but she didn't realize I was the one who knew how to think my way out of it. My new life wasn't going to be handed to me. I'd have to build it again from the rubble. And then, once I was strong, I was coming back for her. The night I chose was a new moon. I'd learned in my planning that a little darkness is a good friend to an old woman in quiet shoes. I waited until 1 a.m, when the night shift was deep in its stupor. My roommate Doris was breathing in that slow, shallow way of hers. My heart felt like it was trying to beat its way out of my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. I slipped out of bed, every muscle protesting, and pulled the extra sweater over my thin nightgown. I put on the slippers, tucked my tiny stash of crackers and water into the deep pocket of the sweater, and took one last look around the sterile room. It wasn't regret I felt, it was triumph. I crept down the hallway, keeping to the edge where the floorboards were less likely to groan. The air was thick with the smells of bleach and old age. I passed rooms where I could hear murmurs and snores, the soundtrack of captivity. At the nurse's station, a large woman I knew as Brenda was asleep in her chair, her chin on her chest, a romance novel fallen into her lap. I held my breath, moving one slow step at a time, my eyes locked on her. I felt like a character in one of those spy movies George and I used to love, only my knees were creaking and my weapon was a handful of saltines.
The West Wing side door was my target. Just as my observations had predicted, a little green light on the alarm panel was blinking erratically. Faulty wiring. A budget cut in a place like this meant a tiny sliver of opportunity for me. I twisted the handle. It was heavy, and for one heart-stopping second, I thought it was locked from the outside. I put my whole body into it, my shoulder groaning in protest, and with a low, metallic groan, it opened. The cold night air hit me like a physical blow. It was a crisp October night, and the shock of it nearly took my breath away. But it was the air of freedom. I slipped out, pulling the door quietly shut behind me. I was in a small, fenced-off service alley. Now, for the second phase. I had to get to the back gate, near the kitchens, and hope the delivery truck was on schedule. I hugged the shadows of the building, moving faster now, fueled by adrenaline. I could see the main road through the iron fence, cars passing like ghosts in the night. To them, I didn't exist. I was just a shadow in a nightgown and slippers. As I rounded the corner to the back of the building, I saw them. The twin headlights of the Bayside linen supply truck, its engine rumbling softly. A man in a grubby jacket was unloading carts of folded sheets. The gate was wide open. This was it, my chance. I didn't run. I was long past my running days. But I moved with a purpose I hadn't felt in years. I kept my head down, walking along the edge of the parking lot, pretending I was just a woman out for a very, very late stroll. The driver didn't even glance my way. I walked right through that open gate and didn't look back. I just kept walking until the rumble of the truck faded and the sounds of the highway grew louder. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. The first 48 hours were a blur of cold and fear. The adrenaline wore off, leaving me exhausted and shivering. I found a bus stop with a small shelter and huddled there until dawn, pulling my knees to my chest. Every person who walked by felt like a threat. Every police car that passed made my heart leap into my throat. Would they be looking for me? A missing old woman from the nursing home? Tiffany's story would be so convincing. Oh, my poor mother-in-law, her mind is gone. She's wandered off again. She's a danger to herself. By the end of the first day, my crackers were gone and my water was empty. Hunger was a dull ache in my belly. The city was a terrifying place when you had nowhere to go. I had $5 million to my name and I couldn't even buy a cup of coffee. I saw a woman my age, dressed nicely, walk out of a cafe laughing with her friend. The gulf between her world and mine was so vast it felt like I was on another planet. The despair was a cold, heavy blanket. For a moment, a single, terrible moment, I thought maybe Tiffany was right. Maybe I couldn't make it. Maybe I was just a foolish old woman who had traded a warm bed for a cold bench. That's when I saw him. He was a man, probably a few years younger than me, sitting on a low brick wall across the street, methodically eating an apple. He was thin, with a wiry frame, a neat gray beard, and the kind of observant eyes that didn't miss a thing. He wasn't looking at me, but I knew he'd seen me. A few minutes later, a younger man, agitated and loud, came up to try to get money from him. The older man didn't get angry. He just looked the aggressor in the eye and said, in a voice that was quiet but carried incredible authority, "Son, that is not the way. Move along." And the younger man did. He just turned and walked away. I knew in my gut this man was different. Later that day, as I was trying to figure out where I could possibly sleep, he walked over to my bus stop. He didn't crowd me. He stood a respectful distance away. "You're new out here," he said. It wasn't a question. I just nodded, my throat too tight to speak. "You won't last the week like that," he said, his voice not unkind. "You got that just fell off the turnip truck look. People can see it a mile away. It makes you a target." He took the last bite of a sandwich he was holding and sized me up. "You look like you got some sense in your head, though. Just no street sense. What's your name?" "Eleanor," I whispered. "Sarge," he said. "Come on. I'll take you someplace safe. Safer anyway. You can't stay out in the open like this." I was terrified, but something in his calm, steady demeanor made me trust him. It was a feeling I hadn't had in a long time. I was so used to Tiffany's false sweetness that this man's blunt honesty felt like a lifeline. I got up, my stiff legs aching, and followed him. He led me away from the main streets, down an embankment, and into a world I never knew existed. There, in the cavernous space underneath a sprawling highway overpass, was a community. It was a village of tents and tarps, lit by the flickering orange glow of a few fires burning in oil drums. The constant roar of traffic overhead was a strange sort of ceiling, a river of noise that shielded this place from the world above. Sarge introduced me around. There was Maria, a former nurse who had lost her job and then her apartment after a bad illness. There was a young man they called Flicker, who could fix anything with a bit of wire and some tape. There was a whole collection of people, a tapestry of broken lives who had found a way to stitch themselves together into a kind of family. They shared food, they looked out for each other, they had rules. No stealing, no trouble. Everyone pulls their weight. Sarge gave me a thick blanket and a spot near his own lean-to, which was the most organized in the camp. He said, "You're Eleanor now. Whatever you were before, that's done. You're one of us for now. You keep your head down, you watch, and you learn."
And I did. For the first time since Michael died, my brain, my real brain, started to hum again. I wasn't just a patient or a victim. I was an observer, a planner. This place was a business of its own, a business of survival. It had supply chains, dumpster diving, day labor. It had security, watching each other's backs. It had a complex social structure. And just like in our hardware stores, I started to see the inefficiencies. I saw the opportunities. My revenge on Tiffany was still a distant dream, a pinpoint of light at the end of a long, dark tunnel. But for the first time, I felt like I was actually on the path, not just locked in a room. I was living under a highway. I had nothing but a borrowed blanket, but I was finally, truly free. And I was starting to build my army. Life under the overpass was a masterclass in shedding illusions. All the things I had once considered necessities, a soft bed, a hot shower on demand, 4 walls that belonged to me, were revealed for what they were, luxuries. Here, life was stripped down to the bone. Survival was the only currency that mattered. The roar of the trucks and cars on the highway above was a constant thunderous heartbeat, At first, it was maddening, a sound that vibrated deep in my teeth. But after a week, it became a strange sort of white noise, a blanket of sound that hid us from the city that had discarded us. Sarge was a man of routine and discipline, and I suspected it was the only thing holding this fragile community together. Mornings started before the sun came up. We'd put out the fires, pack up anything that couldn't be left out, and try to make ourselves as invisible as possible before the city truly woke up. Some people went off to panhandle, others to collection routes for cans and bottles, and a few had regular under-the-table day labor gigs. I was too old for physical labor and too proud to beg. My assets were my mind and my experience, and I needed to figure out how to use them. For the first few weeks, I was mostly an observer. I learned who was trustworthy and who was not. I learned that Maria, the ex-nurse, was the heart of the camp. She kept a small but meticulously organized stash of first aid supplies she'd salvaged or been given, and she could patch up a cut or diagnose an infection with a skill that was both heartbreaking and impressive to watch. Flicker, the tech whiz, was a quiet young man, no older than 25. He was a wizard with electronics. He had a small solar panel he'd cobbled together that he used to charge old phone batteries, which he'd then trade for food or other necessities. He could take apart a discarded radio and make it work, pull copper wire from old TVs, and he spoke about circuit boards the way a poet speaks about sonnets. My first contribution was laughably simple, but it changed everything. I was watching the can collectors come back one evening, their bags half full, their shoulders slumped in exhaustion. They were all competing, hitting the same few blocks downtown, coming back with meager returns. It was disorganized. It was inefficient. That night, I asked Sarge for a meeting. We sat on upturned buckets near the river that flowed sluggishly beside our encampment. Sarge, we're leaving money on the table. He raised an eyebrow, a gesture that was surprisingly expressive on his weathered face. We don't have a table, Eleanor. It's a figure of speech, I said, a small smile touching my lips for what felt like the first time in an age. I used to run a business, several of them, and what we have here is a disorganized workforce with the shared goal. We can do better. I explained it to him in the same terms I would have used with the new manager at Vance Hardware. We needed to map out the city, assign territories based on the day of the week, hitting residential neighborhoods on their specific recycling days. We needed to set up a central collection point here in the camp so we could pool our resources and take the bulk load to the recycling center that paid the best rates, which was clear across town. A couple of the younger guys could handle the transport with the shopping carts. In return for the organization, everyone would contribute a small percentage, say 5%, of their earnings to a community fund. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. Sarge listened, his intelligent eyes never leaving my face. When I was done, he was quiet for a long time. The highway hummed above us. He was about to get exactly what he deserved, and I had a front row seat. Don't go anywhere. A community fund, he asked finally. For what? For Maria's medical supplies, for Flicker's batteries, for a communal meal once a week, for emergencies. We're stronger together than we are apart. This just makes it official. He nodded slowly. You're not who you seem to be, Eleanor. None of us are, Sarge.
He agreed to let me try. It took some convincing, but when I drew a map of the city in the dirt with a stick and explained the logic, people started to catch on. It made sense. Within 2 weeks, our collective earnings from recycling had nearly tripled. The community fund was real. We bought a huge sack of potatoes and a dozen cans of stew, and Maria cooked it up in a big pot over the fire. We all ate together, a hot meal that filled our bellies and warmed our souls. That was the night I stopped being the new old woman and became Eleanor. They started coming to me with problems, asking for advice. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was contributing. I was rebuilding a life, one discarded aluminum can at a time. With the community on more stable footing, my own thoughts returned, with a vengeance, to Tiffany. The rage was still there, a hot coal banked in my chest. Now that I was safe, now that I had allies, it was time to plan my war. I needed information first. I couldn't just pop up on the grid. Tiffany would have alerts on my name, my social security number, everything. If I tried to access my accounts, she'd know in an instant. She'd send the authorities, and they'd drag me right back to Golden Twilight, only this time they'd never let me out. I needed eyes and ears in the world I'd left behind. I went to Flickr. I found him carefully dismantling a broken laptop someone had thrown out. Flickr, I began, sitting down on a milk crate beside him. I have a problem that requires a particular kind of genius. He didn't look up, but he stopped working. I'm not a genius. I just like to see how things fit together. That's a kind of genius, I said. I need to know what's being said about me on the internet. My old name was Eleanor Vance. I need to know if there's a missing person report, an obituary, anything. I explained that I couldn't use a public computer myself, that it was too risky. I needed a ghost to do my searching. He finally looked at me, his eyes sharp and assessing. You're in trouble. Big trouble, I confirmed, and I aimed to turn it into big trouble for someone else. For my share of the community fund, I'd insisted on getting a small prepaid debit card. It was in Sarge's name, but he let me manage it. I offered to use $20 from the fund to buy Flickr an hour at a real computer in a public library, plus $10 for himself. He agreed. 3 days later, he came back to the camp, his face grim. He handed me a few sheets of paper he'd printed out. He found me, he said softly. My hands trembled as I took them. The first was a local news article from a few weeks after my disappearance. It was titled Community Praise for Missing Elder. There was a picture of me from my son's wedding, smiling and happy, and there was a quote from Tiffany, her words oozing with false concern. We're just heartbroken. She's not well. Her mind, it just started to fail her. We're so worried she's cold or hungry. If anyone sees her, please don't approach her, as she may be frightened and confused. Just call the police. She had painted me as a helpless, insane old woman. She had turned the entire city into my potential captors. The rage burned hotter. But it was the second piece of paper that made the blood drain from my face. It was a screen grab from Tiffany's social media page. It was a photo of her, smiling radiantly, on the arm of a handsome man I recognized, one of the business associates she had brought to my house. The caption read, "So excited to announce our new venture. Michael would be so proud that we're honoring his legacy by starting the Vance Foundation for Dementia Awareness. With my amazing partner, Richard, we'll make a difference. #blessed, #charity, #making a difference." She was using my money, my husband's name, my son's memory. She had turned our life's work into a fraudulent charity, a front to make her look like a saint, while she bled my accounts dry with her con-man boyfriend. That was it. That was the moment the last of my fear died and was replaced with ice-cold fury. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was about my husband's honor and my son's legacy. Tiffany hadn't just buried me. She was dancing on my family's grave. "Flickr," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "I need more than information. I need a new identity." He swallowed hard. "Eleanor, that's not like fixing a radio. That's big." "I am aware," I said, folding the papers with precise, angry motions. "The woman who did this to me thinks I'm a confused old lady wandering in a nightgown. She has no idea I'm down here building an army. and she has no idea what I'm about to do to her. The planning phase was over. It was time to build the weapons of my war.
A new identity, Flicker repeated, the words hanging in the damp air under the bridge. Eleanor, that's movie stuff. Real life, it's databases, it's biometrics. It's not so easy. I'm not looking to become a secret agent, Flicker, I said, my voice flinty. I tapped the picture of Tiffany and her smarmy boyfriend. I'm looking to become a ghost. I don't need a driver's license or a passport. I need a name that isn't Eleanor Vance, a name that can open a P.O. box, a name that can get a pay-as-you-go cell phone, a name that doesn't set off alarms when it pops up on a library computer's sign-in sheet. I need to be a quiet, invisible, 69-year-old woman named Carol Smith, or whatever name you find. He looked from the papers to my face, and for the first time, I think he saw the full depth of the iceberg. He saw the cold, hard resolve beneath the grandmotherly surface. How? He asked, intrigued now. The challenge had hooked him. I said, you find people who fall through the cracks, people who die with no family, John and Jane Does, people who are homeless themselves and pass away, but their records aren't updated for months. There has to be a gap in the system, a name I can borrow for a little while. This was the beginning of my transformation. Flicker, energized by the puzzle, spent the next week at the library. He used their public access computers, bouncing the connection through so many proxies that he said they'd have an easier time tracking a fly in a hurricane. He dove into public records, obituaries, and the digital graveyards of the city. Meanwhile, I set Sarge to a task. I gave him $20 from our community fund, it was growing nicely, and a mission. I told him, I need you to go to my old neighborhood. Don't get close to the house. Just watch. See what the pattern is. Who comes and goes. What car she drives. Sarge was a natural. His years on the street had made him an expert at being unnoticed. He came back 2 days later with a full report. My house, my home, was a hub of activity. Tiffany was living there, driving my late son's Lexus. The smarmy boyfriend, Richard, practically lived there too, driving a flashy sports car that made me sick to my stomach. And they're having work done, Sarge reported. Contractors. Looks like they're putting in a pool. A pool. In the backyard where George had planted his prize-winning roses. The extravagance, the sheer disrespect of it fueled my fire. Tiffany wasn't just living off my money, she was erasing every trace of me and George. A few days later, Flicker returned, his eyes bright with success. He said, I found her. He handed me a printout. Her name was Agnes Miller. She was 70 years old and died 6 weeks prior in a city-run shelter. She had no listed next of kin, no property, nothing. She was for all intents and purposes a ghost in the system already. Her digital footprint was almost non-existent, which was perfect. Welcome to the world, Agnes, Flicker said with a wry smile. And just like that, Eleanor Vance was gone, and Agnes Miller was born. Our first move as Agnes was to get a P.O. box at a small mail services store miles from my old neighborhood. Then a burner phone, paid for in cash. These were small things, but they felt like monumental victories. They were the first bricks in the new life I was building, the one I would use to dismantle Tiffany's. I know this part is hard to hear, but it's important. The truth was about to come out, and it was going to be glorious. Our base of operations became the top floor of the main city library. It was warm, quiet, and had free internet.
To the librarians, I was just a quiet old woman named Agnes who liked to read and spend her days out of the cold. Flicker was the grandson who helped me with the confusing computer stuff. Nobody looked twice. It was the perfect cover. From this new headquarters, we launched our attack. It was a three-pronged strategy, just like I would have planned for a competitor in the hardware business. We would attack her finances, her reputation, and her partner. The partner came first. Richard. I had a feeling about him. Men like that, with their perfect teeth and easy charm, who show up right after a rich woman gets a windfall, they don't have clean hands. I set Flicker to digging. Flicker was a magician. He found Richard's real name with a bit of digital sleight of hand I didn't even try to understand. His name was not Richard Croft. His name was Richard Kemp. And Mr. Kemp had a history, a long one. There were fraud charges in Arizona, a lawsuit for a real estate scam in Florida. He was a professional parasite, latching on to wealthy, vulnerable women. Tiffany wasn't his first victim, and I had a feeling she wasn't his only current one.
Next, the Vance Foundation for Dementia Awareness. This was Tiffany's shield, the thing that made her look like an angel. I knew it had to be a sham. I went online, using my new identity, and made a $5 donation to the foundation via a prepaid card. It was the best $5 I ever spent. Because, as a donor, I was now legally entitled to request copies of their financial filings and mission statements. I sent a polite, professionally worded email from Agnes Miller, a concerned citizen who wanted to ensure her money was being used properly. The documents that came back a week later were a joke. Vague mission statements, inflated administrative costs, and a lot of flowery language about outreach with no specifics. It was a classic shell. Money went in from my accounts, and it was funneled out to consultants and service providers, companies that, after a little more digging by Flicker, turned out to be shell corporations registered to one Richard Kemp. He wasn't just her boyfriend, he was her co-conspirator, and he was laundering my money right under the nose of the IRS. While Flicker worked the digital angle, I used Sarge for the physical one. We needed proof of my competency. My word against Tiffany's and her bought and paid for doctor wouldn't be enough. I needed a new doctor, an unimpeachable one. But I couldn't just walk into a clinic. Through Sarge's network, the invisible city of people who know how things really work, he found us a doctor. Dr. Evans was a retired physician who ran a free clinic out of a church basement twice a week. He'd lost his own wife to Alzheimer's and had a deep-seated hatred for elder exploitation. Sarge arranged a meeting. I went to the church basement, my heart pounding. I was still a missing person. This was a huge risk. I sat across a folding table from a tired-looking man with kind eyes and told him everything. I didn't hold back. I told him about George and Michael, about building our business, about Tiffany, the power of attorney, Golden Twilight. I gave him dates, numbers, financial details. I answered every question he threw at me, from complex business scenarios to naming all the presidents backward from the current one. He listened for 2 hours without interruption. When I was finished, he leaned back and looked at me, his gaze penetrating. "Mrs. Vance," he said, using my real name for the first time, "you have a sharper mind than my nephew, who's currently in law school. You don't have dementia. You have a viper in your nest." He agreed to do a full cognitive assessment, officially and on the record, whenever I was ready. I had my weapon. We had all the pieces now. The evidence of Richard's criminal past, the proof that the foundation was a financial fraud, a credible doctor to testify to my sanity. It was like laying out all the merchandise for a huge store opening. Everything was priced, polished, and in its right place. Tiffany was living in a beautiful house built on a lie, and I had the wrecking ball poised and ready to swing. The quiet and visible old woman named Agnes was about to roar. The time for hiding in the shadows was over. It was time to turn on the lights, all of them, and let Tiffany see the monster she had created. My army was small, a homeless veteran, a young tech prodigy, and a retired doctor, but they were loyal, brilliant, and as underestimated as I was. We were the invisibles, the people the world looked right through, and that was about to become our greatest weapon. "It's time to make the first move," I announced to Flicker one afternoon at our library table. "But we're not going to attack her. We're going to make her world start attacking her." He looked up from his screen, a glint in his eye. "Chaos theory. I like it." Our first package was a work of art. It contained printouts of all of Richard Kemp's previous scams, the mugshot from Arizona, the court filings from the Florida lawsuit, articles about other women he'd swindled. We didn't add any commentary. We just laid out the facts in a neat manila envelope. The recipient was a journalist at the city's biggest paper, an investigative reporter named Mark Riley, who had a reputation for being a bulldog when he smelled corruption. We sent it from a mailbox 3 towns over. No fingerprints, no return address, just a little grenade of truth rolled under the tent of Tiffany's circus. Our second package was for the government. It was more formal. A cover letter, written by me in the persona of a concerned former employee of the Vance Hardware Company, detailed my worries about the new foundation bearing my old family's name. Behind the letter was the evidence. Copies of the foundation's sparse public filings, highlighted to show the exorbitant administrative costs. And alongside it were the corporate registration documents for the shell companies owned by Richard Kemp. We made it painfully, obviously clear that money was going from a charity into the pockets of its director's boyfriend. We sent one copy to the IRS and the other to the State Attorney General's office, the division that oversees charities.
Then we waited. For a week, nothing happened. The silence was agonizing. I started to worry we had failed, that our little paper arrows had simply vanished into the maw of bureaucracy. But then, on a Tuesday morning, Flicker came to our spot under the overpass, barely able to contain his excitement. He held up his phone. "It's starting," he said. It was a small article on the newspaper's website, buried in the local business section, written by Mark Riley. The headline was innocuous: "Local philanthropist's partner questioned in past business dealings." It didn't mention Tiffany by name, but it named Richard Kemp and vaguely referenced his new charitable ventures in our city. It was a warning shot, a professional courtesy from the reporter, letting Richard know he was being watched. To Tiffany, it must have been a terrifying little mystery. Where did this come from? Who was talking? The real victory came a week later. Sarge, on one of his reconnaissance missions, saw Tiffany screaming at Richard on the front lawn of my house. The pressure was working. The seeds of doubt had been planted. Her perfect, saintly world had a crack in it. Now it was time for me to step back into the light. With Sarge as my escort and Dr. Evans as my star witness, I walked into the office of a young firecracker of a lawyer named Jessica Ramirez. We'd found her through the free clinic. She specialized in elder law and had a reputation for taking on cases that other lawyers wouldn't touch. She worked out of a cramped office above a pizza shop, but her eyes held a fire that a corner office couldn't buy. I laid it all out for her. The story, the evidence Flicker had gathered, and finally, the cognitive assessment from Dr. Evans, notarized and ironclad. I watched her read it, her expression shifting from curiosity to shock, and then to a focused, cold anger. She looked up from the final page. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice brimming with energy, "they picked a fight with the wrong woman. When do you want to begin?" "I want her to feel safe, right before the ceiling falls in," I said, "and I know just the day." Tiffany's big event was the Vance Foundation inaugural donor gala. It was a $1,000 a plate dinner held in the ballroom of the city's fanciest hotel. The mayor was supposed to be there. It was to be her crowning achievement, the night she cemented her place as the grieving widow turned selfless philanthropist. It was also the night I took my life back. I wasn't at the gala, of course. I was with Jessica Ramirez, filing an emergency injunction to have Tiffany's power of attorney revoked and all my assets frozen. While Tiffany was clinking champagne glasses and accepting praise, a judge was signing the order that would bring her world crashing down. Jessica arranged for the process server to arrive at the hotel at 9 p.m. at the height of the festivities. And because we had given our old friend Mark Riley an anonymous tip about a major development in the Richard Kemp story, he and a news photographer were there too. I saw the pictures online the next day. Tiffany, resplendent in a glittering evening gown, standing at a podium. The process server, a grim-looking man in a rumpled suit, walking onto the stage and handing her the papers. The flash of the camera catching the look on her face. A perfect storm of confusion, humiliation, and dawning horror. She had been publicly, spectacularly checkmated. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic for her. The story was on the front page of the paper the next morning, complete with my photo and Tiffany's side by side. The headline, Dementia Dilemma, Millionaire Heiress Accused of Swindling Senile Mother-in-Law. The mayor issued a statement distancing himself from her. The hotel canceled her credit cards when the bank, honoring the court order, froze every account she could access. The IRS and the Attorney General, already investigating, now had a public scandal and a mountain of evidence dropped in their laps. They launched a full-scale criminal investigation. And Richard? The parasite did what parasites do. Once the host was drained, he vanished. The sports car was gone one morning, and he never answered Tiffany's calls again. He left her alone to face the consequences of the empire they had built on lies. The final court hearing was almost a formality. Tiffany showed up, looking pale and haggard, a shadow of her former self. Her high-priced lawyer couldn't do anything against the mountain of evidence Jessica presented. My name was cleared, my assets were returned, the power of attorney was burned on the fire of justice. I was Eleanor Vance again. The first thing I did was go home. The half-dug pool was an ugly wound in my backyard, a monument to Tiffany's greed. But the house was still standing. My floral armchair was still in the living room. I walked through the quiet rooms, touching the walls, breathing in the scent of 40 years of my life. I had been to hell and back, but I had made it home. I could have stopped there. I had my money, my home, my name, but I wasn't the same woman who had left this house. My revenge on Tiffany was watching her life implode, watching her face charges of fraud and embezzlement, knowing she would lose everything she had stolen. My victory was what came next. I hired a lawyer to expunge Flickr's minor juvenile record and established a trust that put him through college for computer engineering. I made a major donation to Dr. Evans's free clinic, ensuring it could stay open 5 days a week, and I put Maria on the payroll as the lead nurse. And with the bulk of my money, I started a real foundation, not a fake one. I bought a derelict apartment building, and with Sarge as the on-site director, we converted it into clean, safe, transitional housing for the homeless people of my city. A place where people could find a foothold to climb back into the world. I'm sitting on my back porch now. The ugly hole in the yard is gone, filled in. In its place, I've planted new rose bushes, descendants of the ones George loved so much. They're small, but they're growing. I don't think about Tiffany much anymore. She's just a footnote in my story. My real story is about this quiet moment. It's about realizing that I survived the unimaginable, that I fought my way out of the dark not just by tearing down the person who put me there, but by building something better in its place. I am 69 years old, and for the first time in a long time, I am truly, completely home.